All right, so welcome everybody to this webinar with Drift and our friends at Chorus. We're really pleased to have y'all. Today we're talking about performance management in a pandemic, specifically how to maintain consistent close rates across your sales organization. Thank you all for joining. I'm joined by Dan Templeton, the VP of Strategic Sales at Chorus.ai. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so great to be here. Thanks, Kyle. Dan Templeton, VP of Strategic Sales here at Chorus.ai. Been with Chorus for about a year and a half, and previously came from outreach and spent some time there as their RVP of the Northeast team. So really excited to chat with you today, Kyle, and let's help the folks out there get their deals closed and look forward to 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really glad to have you, Dan. I appreciate you joining us today. And my name is Kyle Bastien. I used to do enablement here at Drift. And then over the past year, I've gotten involved in as a subject matter expert for our AI offering. So I've spent a lot of time in management roles and then more recently back into the field. So we'll try to approach this problem from both angles, from the leadership expertise that Dan can bring to the table here, and then from the field perspective, which I'll try to add some color commentary to. So look forward to a great discussion. Of course, there's questions that you can fire at us at any point. We'll save some time at the end, but of course prefer to just jump in and answer any as they come up based on how the conversation unfolds. So don't be shy, find us very interruptible as we go through this. In terms of agenda, we're gonna organize the conversation into four major topics. The first is we're briefly on what is sales process management. I don't want to spend too much time here. We could do, of course, entire webinars just on this topic alone. But I want to talk about specifically why it is important to have your process down in the context of effective management during a pandemic. And then we'll talk about, some of the tactics for sales management in a digital and constantly changing world, how to align yourself consistently with the buyer's journey. And then, we'll speculate as to kind of what's next in sales management as we turn the corner into 2021. And of course, anything else that y'all would like to talk about as manifested by your questions. So let's talk about sales process management. Dan, you're leading a team in strategic sales over at Chorus. What does sales process management mean to you? And why is it important to think about this in the context of the managing during a pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And to me, it means really getting back to basics. So from, looking at the entire customer journey and aligning to that customer journey, not your sales process, but really how do buyers buy your specific solution or product. So, making sure from an outbound perspective that messaging is relevant, personalized, and the call to action is actually tied to the outcomes that matter to the persona you're targeting. I think there's a big push out there to do more and volume. But at the end of the day, it's really, really noisy, especially if you're trying to break into directors, VPs, or whatever the persona you're selling to. It's really noisy. So your message really has to crack through all of that noise and be on point, super relevant, and really tied to what your persona cares about. To making sure when we do get our first meetings and that we have a smooth handoff from BDR to AE. And to me, this is something so simple that I think a lot of folks take for granted, myself included in the past, is showing up to those first meetings super prepared. Do the research. There are so many resources out there that can make your conversation so much better, so much more valuable for your buyer. From 10Qs to 10Ks, if you're selling to public companies, to Crunchbase, of course, LinkedIn. So do the research, spend some time understanding who you're talking to, the problem they're trying to solve, and ultimately the company that you're talking to. And of course, multi-threading your deals, making sure you have the right stakeholders engaged and involved at the right time in the process, aligning executives. And again, everything has to tie back to outcomes. With where we are now today, almost 10 months in, since March, if you're not tied to outcomes, you're selling use cases, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Budgets are way too much scrutinized right now to really effectively sell a use case. So tying back to outcomes and the problem that you solve for your customer. Back to you, Kyle. Oh, you're on mute, Kyle.
I knew that was going to happen at least one time during this webinar. I'm glad to have gotten it out of the way at the first opportunity.
Go.
Thank you for your insights, Dan. I agree. I mean, I think everything you said, I think is true, like whether we're in a pandemic or not. I think what is interesting about this kind of digital only, a lot of things happening on Zoom or other video conferencing software is that it's much more difficult to connect with people. And it's one of the reasons we all spend so much money like on trade shows and flying our strategic reps around the country, so that they could, visit with folks, make that connection, that would form the foundation of a long lasting partnership or business relationship. And we don't really have those opportunities anymore. And so I think it implies that we need to be much better and thoughtful around our messaging. And how can we relate what we're saying, how we're making the point, what we're showing people to convey understanding for personal relevance. And like our brains only have so much bandwidth, like we can either focus on our process or we can focus on like our craft, right? And if we know what our process is and we kind of know where we're going, then we have more bandwidth to spend on how we communicate and how we can be effective in the moment. And so I think it's particularly critical for sales organizations to have the basics down, like the fundamentals of sales process, so that more bandwidth can be allocated to personal relevance when it comes to the actual meeting itself. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, it's really noisy out there now more than ever. People are Zoom fatigued, tool fatigued. And so if you don't have your process nailed down that's tied to the buyer's journey, I think you're adding additional lift to break into those accounts. So it really goes back to the basics. So nailed it, Kyle.
I know we think of our basics at Drift here. We have a sales process much like the one that we shared there. There's a few things that we think about in terms of those actual experiences for the customer. And we're going to talk more about aligning the buying experience, but we think a lot about, a value thesis. And then that's like the most important first impression that you make with the business. And then how we, prosecute discovery and learning about, the individual dynamics that we could not have uncovered through our primary research, showcasing the capabilities and then, constructing the business case to help people allocate the budget and make the decision to go forward. But what, like at Chorus and the team that you run, like, how do y'all think about the fundamentals from a customer experience standpoint within your sales process?
Yeah. So again, delivering value in every single interaction. So understanding and really deeply listening to what our buyers are saying and tying their feedback to how we can potentially come together with a solution. And sometimes we're not able to. You know what? It's best for us to part ways and not waste each other's time, and that's okay. I think we could probably do that more often. But again, showing up every single interaction from discovery to demo to presenting that final business case ROI business case deck, it's got to be delivering value in every single interaction we have.
Oh, man, touchy mouse. Yeah. And so I agree. And then you guys pulled some great statistics on the value of a consistent sales process. I'll also say, that this might sound obvious to some folks, but, I think sales process adherence has been a challenge at most organizations that I've ever worked at. So, I rarely walked onto a sales floor where, you had, 300, 1,000, or even 40 people all completely aligned on exactly what we were doing in every single process. But what does the data tell us as to why it's so important to have that down?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's time saved, right? You look at that 63% of time saved, and I think it goes back to something we've already touched on, which is like aligning the sales process to the buyer's journey. And why I think there's a big disconnect there and a lot of wasted resources and time invested is because those two things are misaligned. How the buyer buys and how the sales process is executed at a lot of organizations, there's a big disconnect there. And I just think it makes for a not ideal customer experience, and there's lots of room for improvement there. So I think that's my biggest takeaway here.
Yeah, I agree. We were even talking. You might notice we both have bookshelf motifs in our home offices, which is generous. This is our dining room. But what is you were talking about a book about what was one of the recommendations you made? We were talking about before the webinar started
Sure.
about
So
selling the way people buy.
Sell the Way You Buy by David Primer. And I've now mentioned this in a couple of these, and it's really, really good. And it goes back to the basics again of fundamentals, understanding the various biases that our buyers have. And you think about when you purchase something, right? The biases that we have when we go into something, whether it's recency or it's a historical bias, but there are so many biases out there that I think create friction unnecessarily. And if we understand those biases right off the bat and address them, acknowledge them and address them, I just think it makes for such a improved experience from both sides.
Love it. What would a modern webinar be without a good book recommendation? And that was what I hadn't heard of that one yet. I love it. So thank you. So let's talk about managing then in a digital and uncertain world. So 2020 obviously changed, how buyers buy and how sellers sell, right? Like 90% of B2B teams transition to a virtual sales model. I think this kind of research, I know in the field, I was talking a lot about this in April as like, guys, the world's changing and we all got to make a change. And at that time, I think a lot of folks were wondering how long this kind of new normal was going to last. It seems to be something that is longer than expected and semi-permanent probably. But like, what are some of the challenges, I guess, that have been introduced from a management standpoint, in this new reality? Like, what are the things you had to change and had to adjust to effectively manage your team?
Yeah, so we can't go on site anymore. And that was a big part of leading the strategic team, which is mid-market enterprise accounts. A lot of our selling and buying was done on site. And, that immediately went away, first week of March. So working around that and understanding, people are on Zooms all day long and really like having true empathy for what our teams are going through and understanding like, we have kids in the background. We have our lives happening around us in our offices. And that is something that I think we've all adjusted to, and it's taken time. And, depending on how many kids you have or how challenging that is, I think people have adjusted it at a different rate. So just understanding where people are in their journey or in their specific company, I think having that true empathy goes a long way to really connecting when it's virtual like this versus in person.
I agree. And what's been interesting too is, as awkward as this has been for a lot of us, I know, at least in this McKinsey survey that we're quoting here, a lot of buyers have actually reported like, hey, this was weird at first, but it's actually not so bad now that we're into it, and they're finding it easier to evaluate vendors in some ways because like things happen a little bit faster. We don't need to like coordinate on sites and you can, jump on Zoom calls. And a lot of sellers are finding themselves able to access new markets, that they might not have been able to approach previously. So there's some upside too to consider in this. Yeah. Let's talk about what's changed. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just going to say, I totally agree, Kyle. That's that there has been new opportunities opened as a result. And I think people are getting used to it. And it really is like the norm for most of us now. So agreed.
So let's talk about like what we should be focusing on in terms of what's different. I'll grab the top two here, and I'm gonna kick it over to you, Dan. And we're in no particular order, but these are some of the things that we're focusing on, particularly Drift. So the first thing is like what we're witnessing is this is clearly now a digital first, and in some cases digital only sales and buying experience. And the implication to me is that every organization draws the handoff between marketing and sales at a different place, right? It used to be just like MQL, and then everything else that happened after that was the sales responsibilities. And then, maybe it was SQL, right? Where the handshake was there. And then maybe it was pipeline now. And I think what we're finding is two things. Like one, marketing organizations are more accountable all the way through to revenue. And that two, sales needs to move up the funnel and start engaging on the digital channels. Of course, like, through technology drift that others provide, you're able to talk to folks when they're on the website, to engage with them at that point. And we're finding that to be a critical component of integrating sellers onto the website. That can't be the domain of marketers anymore. And that's something that we see as a critical trend, which is what I would summarize as just a blurring of the line between the handoff between sales and marketing. Marketing goes further to revenue, sales moves further up the funnel, to the point where we're gonna have some interesting conversations around attribution, I think, in 2021, and how that is gonna change in this world. And then the second thing is embracing sales automation. You shared a stat earlier, Dan, about, I think, 2/3 of sales reps' time is not spent selling, and that is critical. And so I think that begs the question of, like, well, what are they doing? And in a world where connection has become harder than ever, we need as much time as possible for ourselves to be connecting with their buyers. And so if we analyze rigorously, places in the buyer's journey where there is friction, places in the buyer's journey where there is wasted motion, how can we automate those things? And we think a lot about it, Drift, as an example, the idea of like inbound leads. And I've worked on, XDR teams that might spend 80% of their touches on leads that are not qualified. And so if we can, use technology as an assist for those teams to automate some of those processes, we see that as a strategy that helps win in a digital-only environment. I would love to get your feedback on those thoughts and hear more about, some of the things that you're doing and that Chorus is doing to adapt.
Yeah, agreed. And like, you think about those leads and how expensive they are to generate, right? We're talking at a minimum hundreds of dollars, in different orgs, they could be as much as thousands of dollars to actually generate those leads. So it's a good segue to, how are we converting those leads? How are we converting those MQLs into a first meeting, and what's happening in those first meetings? From my perspective and my career, deals are won or lost in discovery. So again, are we showing up prepared? Are we converting those opportunities? Are we aligning to the outcomes that ultimately matter to our buyers, and converting those from stage to stage? And a small incremental improvement in early stage conversion rates down funnel is significant. In a lot of cases, millions of dollars of additional ARR if we can just nail those first and second conversations. So making sure that we're taking those hard-earned and well-deserved leads that marketing and the BDR or SDR team is generating for us, and we're converting those to ultimately become happy customers, is critical, and one of, I think, the most important metrics, certainly from my perspective, that we measure and consistently are tracking against. And taking data-driven approach and removing the anecdotal or gut feeling from strategy, right? Using the data and those insights to drive your strategy, to action your team, and not gut feeling. I think that's something that's probably not new, but now more important than ever. People don't have visibility. You don't have your team around you to bounce ideas off and to talk through things. So really letting the data tell the story and point you in the right direction from a strategy and even tactical perspective. And again, it all ties back to consistent messaging that's relevant, that's personalized, and accountability that messaging is actually working. Are you A/B testing it? Are you incrementally improving it, iterating and testing against message? Just constant improvement is super important to nailing all of these things.
Well, yeah, and you make some really interesting points. I'm going to check make sure I'm not muted. Nailed it. All right, great. Those last two particularly, you mentioned those as not necessarily being new concepts, but I would imagine like this is technology, their Chorus technology plays a big role in providing this for businesses. And it may not be new for the inside sales team, but I bet it's new for the field sales team that just became an inside sales team. And so like those motions for leaders like yourself at organizations that are used to managing, field reps, that might be new, and something that, is a capability that they have not had to or been able to bring to bear when 100% of their time was in the field. And now 100% of their time is in a Zoom conference and on a screen share. So I think interesting opportunities there for teams like that, leaders like yourself, using the technology that Chorus provides.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so how is tech enabling more permanent process change? I think you guys are spearheading this research, so why don't you walk us through it, Dan?
Yeah, so some really, really interesting data points, and this is taken from hundreds of thousands of conversations from our customer base. So very, very objective data from a large sample size, and some really interesting takeaways. So 10% more meetings for closed-won deals quarter over quarter. So like you think about it, and people aren't traveling on planes, they're not in person, executives aren't meeting with their board in person. So at the end of the day, people have a lot more time, and that time quickly gets filled up with meetings, whether it's internal, which I think we all can sympathize with, as well as, there's an availability now for folks to have more meetings, to have more C-suite, to have executives join the meeting, which from our perspective is actually accelerating our deals. And we'll go into that a little bit later here. But having 26% more C-suite attend calls, that's really, really great for us as go-to-market and sellers, but it also means expectations are even higher, that you're delivering to those personas when they join the calls. So great to see the uptick there. And then we're showing product more. Our customers and buyers are showing their product earlier in the sales process. And it's really interesting to me to see, like, all right, in trying to tie together why that's happening. And I think it goes to the first 2 points. 10% more meetings, 26% more executives are joining. They want to see the product, right? Like at the end of the day, they want to see the product firsthand. They are very passionate about their own product, I'm sure, and about technology and just the space in general. So they want to see it live. And I think that's leading to this push to show earlier in the sales process and even in the first call, which is really interesting to me. What do you think, Kyle?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's very interesting as well. And there's a stat that I think about a lot that was popularized in the Challenger sale, which is that 68% of the buyer's journey is complete before a buyer wants to talk to sales. Another stat from Challenger, same research, is there's now 7 to 8 people in a B2B buying committee. And so if I think about 2/3 of the sales process or the buying process times 8 people involved, plus you might sell 3 different products to 4 different personas at different stages in the buyer's journey, like that puts an almost impossible burden on the website to handle that percentage of the buyer's journey. And I think that's why we talk a lot about getting sales folks involved in that and making them more digitally relevant, if you will. And that also would make sense to me that like 78%, like people are showing up wanting to see the product more, right? They're investing more of their time in digital exploration and fact finding. By the time they talk to you, like they're closer to buying probably than they were before. So yeah. I'm not surprised by that data.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, let's talk about creating consistent wins across the buyer's journey. So as I think about, I think this is coming from the Drift team, so I'll handle this. But we've made this point a couple times, and I've teased it a little bit. But we're talking about embedding sales across digital channels. And again, to compare kind of like the old world to the new world, right? There, like I've talked about, always there being handoffs, and there's basically, it's not unique for a sales organization, a marketing organization to look at their business in terms of a funnel. If it's inbound, it looks like a regular funnel. If it's ABM, it kind of looks like an inverted funnel. But in either way, there's digital touch points leading at some point to a handoff to a salesperson. I see that as dated. And what is required now, to my previous point around the impossible burden placed on our digital assets, is to involve sales folks in that process automatically and to enable them using like AI and real-time messaging, which buyers today are citing as the most effective channel for B2B vendor evaluation. So the framework we use is engage, understand, recommend. And what we think about is based off of the path that someone took to get there, the persona that they are, and the page that they're on, we can be pretty smart around what kind of conversation does it make sense to have and create a hook that is relevant to that. And this is how we use real-time messaging on our site and others in order to drive that kind of engagement. Then using like kind of, smartly designed questions that are contextual to those three things I just mentioned to better understand where folks are at in the buyer's journey and calibrate where they are. And it's either going to be like top of funnel and they need information. It's going to be the middle of the funnel and they have buying questions, or it's going to be post funnel and they need support and they're already existing customers or they need information to get unstuck. And using this insight, we can then recommend the right thing. And it's probably, again, for those three phases, the right piece of content or, the right rep to talk to, or it's the right information that they need in order to proceed. But in all cases, there's aspects of marketing, there's aspects of automation, and there's aspects of human touch, and it's integrated into all phases of the buyer's journey. And it gets a little blurry as to like where marketing ends and sales starts, right? And where the digital experience ends and the human experience begins. But I think kind of breaking through those silos and barriers is going to be key to personal relevance when folks are engaging in a digital only world. What do you think about that, Dan?
Yeah, I love this. I love this. And look, it ties back to what we've been talking about, that the customer experience is optimized as a result of this, right? They're not having to repeat themselves, or it's just a very, very smooth flow and handoff to the right channel, the right person, and optimizing that customer experience at the end of the day. That's what we're all striving for. So I love this.
No, oh yes, got this stuff. So embracing the sales automation to scale and grow. So this is another McKinsey piece. I'll talk about a couple of these. I want you to get on this too, Dan. But they've said that 30% of sales activities can be automated. We've talked a little bit about that so far, and that's helpful because I think it answers the question of like, are we automating like whole teams? Are we automating part of this? I think we very much see a lot of this as like an assist rather than a replacement. But I'd sign off on that 30% number based on my personal experience. Dan, what context or color would you add to some of these statistics that we're displaying here?
Yeah, I think 30% is right on. And I think that still a lot of companies are below that, and there's some optimization that's available there. So just taking advantage of all the amazing tech and solutions that are out there to, again, give that time back to your team to spend with customers, to build those relationships, to really connect with your buyers and customers. It's such a really a key differentiator from, I think, successful companies to those that are still striving. And I'll defer to you on the chat automation. I know that's your specialty and something Drift is absolutely nailed. So love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I see this as kind of a spectrum, right? Where the more we try to throw up like qualification walls, which might be like multi-field forms or even some chat experiences that ask a ton of questions before somebody can actually get the answer that they need, that will cost opportunities. That'll create friction and that will create barriers. If we, on the other hand, use like large teams to engage in what will definitionally be unqualified live chat when folks get to a website, like that will capture more opportunities, but it'll also be very expensive and operationally complex to execute against. And so when we think about the right mix between using like, AI and then existing, XDR teams, what we're able to find is that folks can, deflect the conversations that rightfully should not go to sales, and that the buyers don't want to talk to sales, while answering some of the higher intent questions and having the folks when they do convert showing up, more informed and sure that they're in the right place to then like accelerate deal cycles, down funnel. So this is from McKinsey, but is in line with the data that we see internally here at Drift, where we are able to, I think, see that quarter deflection is achievable certainly, and that if we can get folks to the right information. If they're not trying to buy, then we can reserve more time for the people who are in a buying cycle, to connect with those sellers that can help them. It looks like, are we getting any good questions over there, Dan?
So
I'm getting the alert, but I can't see them. Yeah.
So we got one just a moment ago from Anonymous. And the question is, what percentage of people are engaging through the website or chat option are actually potential buyers versus competitors or non-buyers?
Okay, great question. So here's what I'll say. I'll qualify this. I'll give you some real answers and then a bunch of qualifications. So when we see folks engaging on websites, like through real-time messaging, B2B organizations can see anywhere from 1 to 3.5% of their site traffic consistently engage in real-time messaging and chat experiences. B2C companies tend to be higher, or SMB customers, where their buyers can be a little more B2C-ish. Basically, like the lower the ticket order, lower the ACV of your product, kind of the higher engagement rate you might get. But some of those companies will see engagement rates, on the order of like 5 to 9% of their site traffic will want to engage in real-time messaging. So hopefully that's helpful in thinking about how many folks will engage with chat. We'll see some competitive action, and you get kind of used to sleuthing it. We don't spend a lot of time thinking about it or managing for it. I'd say for a B2B company where you have a login access on your homepage, you're going to get about half of your traffic is going to be existing customers. The folks who are not existing customers is going to break down 2 to 1, people who are an early buying cycle and people who are in an active buying cycle. Early implies a content experience, and they show up to an enterprise website. It might have 2,000 pages on the sitemap, and they're looking for one that provides the information that they need right away. And so offering some sort of like concierge-like experience to help them find the right content they're looking for is appropriate. And then that last third is people who ask buying questions. It's questions that the SDR team is trained and most adept at handling. And for those folks who want to, you give them those answers as quickly as possible, or else connect them to the rep who can best help them. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of what we see from a breakdown. That of course is going to vary a lot, industry to industry, B2B, B2C, and whether or not you have a login access from your homepage will largely determine the amount of existing customers versus sales and marketing traffic that you get. So I hope that's helpful.
That's great. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, that's good. So yeah, Dan, take us through this slide. This is some really interesting data that we talked about in the prep for this.
Yeah, so this goes back to February of 2020. And you can see a couple of different things here. First of all, closed lost deals always take longer to move to closed lost versus closed won. I think there's a couple of different, I guess, anecdotal reasons that I would think is people don't like to share bad news, right? So that just automatically delays the sharing of your deal is been won or won by status quo or lost by status quo. So I think that's a pretty fair reason that closed lost take more days than closed won. But you can see as February, the news started coming out, and then March, April, it just continues to go up and to the right. And, in this case, not a positive up and to the right. And so you see deals now are at almost their longest to move to either close won or close lost. And I think at the end of the day, there's even more people involved. Budgets are being scrutinized even more. And so it just is taking longer to build that momentum and build that business case that your solution is going to ultimately deliver the ROI or the upside that's been intended. So it's really interesting to me to see, the kind of steady rise through, the early spring, and then really spikes up as things started to lock down and COVID really started to impact everyone across the board. So interesting stats from, a very large number of companies and accounts. What do you see here?
Yeah, and I think it speaks. No, I think it speaks to the kind of adjustment that we're all having to make to adapt for this, right? Like, I mean, it would make sense to me that we'd be able to get some of these sales cycle things down over time if we were to focus on it. I think a lot of companies, had these kind of digital transformation projects on the back burner on like a, like 3 to 5 year horizon, to have a digital first, digital only kind of go to market and data model. that now those became, 3-month projects, right? So I think everybody's making investments to adapt to this, and it would make sense to me that there would be some bumps in the road as we go.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, and talk us through the insights that you guys pulled here as well.
Yeah, so this is, we're seeing an 86% increase in executives joining the conversation. Typically, that's coming a lot earlier in the deal cycles. And so what does that mean for us as our kind of buying landscape has changed pretty significantly with executives joining earlier, more often, that we need to be ready to deliver an executive message, something that is aligned to what executives care about, and what are those three really high level. At the end of the day, if you can impact these three things, you're going to get the attention of any executive, and that's savings, growth, and efficiency gains, right? So can you save me money? Can you help me grow? Whether it's a new product launch or the overall revenue number, or conversions from inbound to MQL, and efficiency, which very simply is getting more from either less or equal resources. So if your solution can speak to one of those three things and really tie back to and align, you're going to get the attention of executives. And I think companies that are doing that well are going to see what on the next slide, Kyle, they're going to see the results that a lot of our customers have been seeing, which is the 38% increase in win rate. So, not only executives joining the calls earlier, but that's also your decision maker. And we all know how hard it still is to get to the ultimate decision maker or economic buyer, whatever your methodology is. But, those people are very, very busy, and, their time is their most valuable thing and one of their only finite things. So getting their attention, if you can do that in the sales process, when they're joining these calls, and demonstrate your use cases to tie to the users and, ultimately your champion or mobilizer, but at the same time, tie those to what executives care about, which is the outcomes of savings, growth, or increase in efficiency, you're putting yourself in a position to really win consistently and effectively. What do you think, Kyle?
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that having C-level executives involved early and often leads to higher win rates. That tracks for me, certainly. I was definitely surprised to see how much more C-level folks are showing up based on the research that y'all provided. But I also remember too that when all this first broke out in March and April, we said internally that the money's moving up. Where, if a VP could approve like a certain purchase, a year ago, like now that's the C-level, right? If a director could approve it, now it's the VP, right? So, things that, if you're used to transacting on a VP level, just there was a kind of a reflexive and likely appropriate tightening of budgets when the pandemic broke, and, the approval layers all went up. And, we were used to, even at Drift, having like the CMOs or the CROs typically, being the ones that would have final say so on a purchase like Drift. But, we're now more and so seeing even the CEOs getting directly involved in the purchase process as, just a new level of rigor was applied to, buying and budget allocation, which when viewed through that lens makes a ton of sense, I think. All right, let's take this to our next topic. And, now we're gonna, look into our crystal ball and make some stuff up that'll prove not to be true, certainly. But, we're gonna throw a guess out there regardless. So let's talk about looking ahead for sales management in 2021 and beyond. We pulled some talking points up here about what's worth keeping, but I'm gonna turn over to you first, Dan. Like, what do you see as like, kind of the most important things that you're gonna keep coming into the next year?
Yeah, I think digital sales absolutely here to stay. And what we're seeing, especially in some of the larger mid-market enterprise accounts, is the past 10 months have accelerated their plans and their strategy to digitally transform. That was more of a 3 to 5 year plan, and much more, a lot more time to get there. But I think the new reality has been a forcing function for them to adapt or fall behind. And I think that is absolutely true, and we're seeing it across the board, from especially in our larger accounts. And yeah, I mean, AI automation, yeah, it's not going anywhere. Like this internet thing, I think it's going to stick, and ultimately make us more effective in doing our jobs and really focusing on the things that matter to our customers. So those are the main two that jump out at me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think about, and I want to provide some context for AI, because I feel like AI gets oversold a lot and over talked about. It's kind of a blanket term that means a bunch of different technologies. But I think what's important to think about when it comes to AI as it relates to a digital first world is that, like there's things that are going to kind of die over the course of the next year if they haven't already. And one of them is like your business hours. And if people are used to evaluating your business at all times, that like their willingness to wait till 8 a.m. tomorrow to get an answer to a burning buying question evaporates. Their willingness to wait for anything has probably already evaporated. So the idea, like AI being able to assist the buyer's journey on your website 24/7 with a 2-second kind of response, I think is going to be a critical feature that's here to stay. So I think specifically that's the kind of AI and automation that I think is going to play very well in 2021. Another thing, like when we talk about like marketing and sales teams need to be unified during go to market and own revenue together, we've talked about that a bit. I think there's some very interesting implications there where like I wouldn't be surprised to see a fundamental rethinking, if not an outright killing, of marketing attribution over the next year. And this is, I'm going to lose a lot of the marketers in the room on this right now, and I'm sorry. But I think about like there's certain experiences where like there's virtual events that, have like salespeople that are showing up and engaging in chat during webinars and virtual conferences. And if a buyer shows up through marketing, registers for a virtual event, and engages with a salesperson during that experience and, gets some information and decides to, book a demo and start a process, like who gets last touch conversion, credit on that? Is it the webinar? Is it the sales rep? And I don't know. And I think those kinds of like merged marketing and sales experiences taking place digitally is going to happen more often, to where attribution, which by the way, I haven't found a single company that does it the same way twice, right, is already, like a lot of art, a lot of science from company to company, is going to become, even more difficult, where, we're just going to care more about driving revenue and outcomes than we are who gets the credit for it. And I think that's going to be some really interesting conversations that we have over the course of the next year.
Yeah, Kyle, preach. I mean, that is, we're seeing it at Chorus, and just the credit doesn't matter. Ultimately, if we're winning together, and one team, one dream. But we are so well aligned at Chorus, and just like, I totally agree with you. And I think that's so important to bringing teams together. It's awesome.
All right, Dan. So take us home. I think we're on our home stretch here, slide wise. So, what are the top 3 things that we need to be thinking about going into the next year?
Yeah. So 3 things: be available, from executives to VPs to any support teams, right? Whether it's your solutions engineer, solutions consultants, CS, BDRs, be available, be ready to team sell, show up as a team, accelerate your deals. Everyone knows time kills deals. And I think we saw it painfully more than ever this year. So accelerating your deals to keep that momentum going, to ultimately get to the win. And then either building or rebuilding a buyer-driven process. And we touched on this throughout our conversation today, Kyle, but I think that's super important. Again, reducing or all out eliminating the friction in the buyer process is really, really important. I think table stakes today, with where we are moving into 2021.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know when we talk about the design cues for an effective strategy, what I'd want everybody to do is to, on that whiteboard, when you're deciding what you're going to do this year, write down 3 words, and it's fast, helpful, and trusted. And everything that we do from a go-to-market standpoint, I think has to have those as the North Star. And if we're deciding how we're going to go to market, how we're going to staff, how we're going to create certain experiences, offers, campaigns, or what have you, we need to kind of check whatever we're doing against. Is this going to be fast? Is the buyer going to find this helpful for where they're at in the journey? And then can they trust us? And can they trust the experience, the information that they're getting? And the things that do those most effectively are going to, by default, create the best buyer experiences. And that's, I think, where all of our focus has to be as we go forward. Oh man, I think we already answered all these. We just went right through this.
Yes. That's
all right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the blocking office hours, again, very tactical, Kyle, but really important. I think everything starts and ends with your calendar. I know managing my calendar is one of the most difficult things in my boss as well. But really dedicating the time to talk through these things, to be available, to understand where we are in the deal, how I can help, how my boss can help, how the team can help, and doing that collectively through an office hours. Again, everybody's super busy and packed calendars. So just time blocking, while very tactical, very impactful to the bottom line. And I think, again, determining what deals qualify an actual leader's time. I think we all understand executive alignment may be overused a bit. So really understanding the executive's time, the buyer's time, and what really qualifies or justifies bringing them into a conversation. So yeah, that would biggest takeaways from be available.
Yeah, we had some of our leaders will just like drop their personal Zoom links in like team Slack channels for lunch, and like they'll just get together and have lunch together, which is, and I'll just like totally creep on those Slack channels and just jump in because I'm lonely. And it's great to connect with people. And we know what's interesting, I'll say this is that, like, I don't know about you feel about this, but I feel like it can easily feel like your company got smaller in this world, right? Because like there's people that you find like interface with over the course of doing your job within the context of your organization. But then there's like scores of other folks that are doing other work that you would kind of see more casually around the office, that if you don't have intention, you're just not going to see as often anymore, right? And so that has this weird, like Drift's is a 400-person company, but it can feel like a 40-person company just in who you interface with day to day internally. And so being intentional about breaking through that is huge. And then, yeah, I love the idea of jersey matching, right? And I actually think executive alignment for like if it's just like, my boss told me to get executive alignment, so I better bring my CRO on this, probably doesn't work as well. But I do think it's very valuable when framed from the buyer's perspective, right? Which is like, look, like we're talking about, a significant investment together. And if I am, the executive sponsor on the buyer side, like I want to make sure that this company I'm doing business with, like, one, knows what's important to us, and has committed to, deliver what's important to us. And two, that their boss knows, right? Like I want the person I'm talking to's boss to know what I care about so that they'll make sure it gets done, right? And like, so like positioning that executive, conversation and alignment, I think is really valuable when done right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and look, like having that alignment, that knowing you have a direct connect to an executive, that if there are, hiccups in the process, or even just, aligning on strategy and sharing best practices from each other's customer bases on things that work, it really is just super effective to getting everybody on the same page and working toward the same outcome.
100%. So what are your recommendations then for accelerating your deals with your team?
Yep. So we just talked in pretty good detail about bringing the executive cavalry. I think it goes from top down, and depending on the size of your company, of course, if relevant, bringing your CEO into the deals to connect with, other executives. I think that shows a willingness and a commitment that we got your back, and we're going to do whatever it takes to make you successful. And, here's the CEO if you need me. I think that's very, very powerful. I think payment terms, although less relevant from what I'm seeing today than late spring, just being flexible. Don't let terms drag out a deal or push a deal. Again, be empathetic, understand where people are and the challenges that people are facing, and align with them. This is a long-term partnership. Don't let something short-sighted or short-term derail all of the progress that you've been able to make. So I would say, payment terms is one of among many of just being flexible on that, and guiding the prospect. And I'll touch on this in the next one, but be very, very prescriptive. And depending on what you sell, who you sell to, your buyer may have never bought something like your solution is. So understanding that and respectfully guiding them through the process of, here's what other customers that look like you, here's what has happened next, here's who I think we should bring in based on previous experience, and just respectfully prescribing what's next through the sales process, I think will really accelerate and prevent your deals from getting stuck.
And this comes full circle to why we talked about process at the beginning, and I think it's important to remember that like the buyers aren't here to buy your product necessarily. Like they're there to make the best decision for their organization as quickly as possible. And so I think it's completely appropriate. Yeah, like buying is hard, right? And so if you can offer that kind of like teach your team and work with your team to just lay out like, look, the folks who made the best decision for their organization in the least amount of time tended to follow these steps, which I would suggest as a go forward plan for this evaluation. Like I'm not selling you Chorus, I'm not selling you Drift, I'm selling you the process, and that should be one of the first things that you gain commitment on at the beginning of the cycle. And if you're doing it right, I think.
Yeah.
And then I know you had some stuff to share on this slide too. Yeah.
I do. And I just want to circle back and buyers are there to solve a problem. They may not even know there's a solution yet. Right. So I think even first things first of like recognizing what is the perceived problem or outcome they're looking to solve and going from there. I just think it shows like showing up prepared and really having that empathy to understand what is it they're trying to solve for. Cool. So we'll take us home here. And again, building or even rebuilding a more buyer-driven sales process, I think we're too seller-centric in terms of this is how we need to run our process, but it doesn't really factor in a lot of cases, what is the buyer's journey? Where are they? What content can we serve up at certain points throughout the journey to help facilitate and expedite their journey? I just think there's still a lot of room to get better here. And I think, again, the past 10 months have been a forcing function for companies to do this and to do it sooner rather than later. So, determining the outcomes our typical customers and buyers are looking to solve, and every step along the way. So again, serving up content, early stage, and I'd love your perspective on this Kyle, in the very early stage before even they become, have an interaction with our teams. But understanding what is the outcome, what do they need to say, yes, this is great, and they call them CVOs, but it's customer verifiable outcomes. Have we check that box, so to speak? Have we met that criteria for them to say, yes, I'm now comfortable to move forward? I think is really important. But I'd love to hear your perspective on, the earlier stage journey as well.
Yeah, I think, we conflate buyer's journey and sales process a lot. They're two very different things. And especially like from the CRM standpoint, it's laughable, right? Because like the sales process in the CRM starts when the opportunity is created and ends when it closed won. And that's maybe half of what the buyer's journey is, right? Because there's all this, awareness around the nature of the problem that they're having and the design cues of the solution and who the best vendors are, who I should probably talk to about this. There's a lot of stuff that happens, often digitally before folks, you're even aware that they're thinking about you. And that's all happening. And then finally, like they buy and like the sales people high five, right? But the customer doesn't high five, like they high five when the problem gets solved, and they have better outcomes than what they had before. And so the sales process, the buyer's process doesn't end at purchase, right? It ends at successful implementation, and new normal of better results.
Love it.
And so I think that's critical to think of as well. So lengthen, the horizon over how you think about what the buyer's journey is, and then, align everything to that. And you can just look at go to your CRM, look at your sales stages. If your sales stages are describing what you're doing, then you might be, consider a reevaluation. If they're describing what the buyer's doing, then you're probably in the right ballpark. But that's a quick litmus test to see how buyer-centric your sales process is.
Yeah, love that, and so true. So, another thing too that we're seeing more and more is, once you understand that process or that journey, how can we facilitate making that easier? How can we show them, like, here's what other customers who have evaluated a specific solution like ours, here are some things that are important to them, and these are some of the questions they're trying to answer. So what are the buying criteria? Like, what are the things I should be looking at and evaluating? Again, they may not know, especially if you're a new category. So they want to understand and be able to see which partner is best for them. And if, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. A lot of our highly differentiated, unique solutions look the exact same to our buyer, especially somebody earlier in this process. So being able to really demonstrate the differentiation, a lot of that is through process and through experience. But those are questions they want to answer. They want to know how someone's been successful launching and using this. And they want to know, even more important, arguably, is why have people failed when they've launched this? What were some of the flags or things that we've learned from or can learn from? So really just providing them the resources and assets at every step along the way to make it a seamless, like, really great experience.
I totally agree. And so we're going to give you a couple offers now. And I think we're at the end, Dan. Outstanding conversation.
Yeah.
I know we each got some content to offer for folks here. So we have ours. The SLA is now how to create real-time marketing and sales strategy for an always-on world. This piggybacks a lot some of the stuff we've been talking about over the course of this webinar. You can download at that link right there for the book, and we'd love for everybody to read the guide. And it talks a lot about how we can create, fast, trusted, and helpful experiences in an always-on world. What do you got for the folks? Oh, there we go.
Yep. So if you want all of the sources of the data that we shared today, you can check out our SOCI, which is State of Conversation Intelligence. And I'm not going to try and read off that URL, but you can click here and we'll be sending this out afterwards. But come check out all of the additional data points and some of the trends that we've been seeing across our customers over the last 10 months. It really, really is fascinating data and some great resources there as well. So appreciate everyone coming out. Kyle, it's been a pleasure. This is awesome.
Great stuff, Dan. Thank you again. I piggyback what Dan said. Appreciate having everybody. Dan, awesome conversation. You guys can email me, by the way, at kbastien. I think it was on the top of the screen, but kbastien@drift.com. If anyone has any follow-up questions or connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm always happy to check in with folks and chat about anything that you heard today that was interesting. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Take care.